One of my best friends of over 10 years texted me yesterday saying that he recently subscribed to Disney Plus and he asked me what should be a simple question. Where should I start watching Star Wars? Little did he know when asking this question that those words in that exact order is what awakens me Winter Soldier style. So now this is everyone's problem. There is a ton of Star Wars content currently on Disney Plus, and I completely understand that looking at it, especially if you have no background in Star Wars, it can be really overwhelming just seeing that wall of content. So today I'm going to give you 3 different approaches for how to view Star Wars, and hopefully I'm going to make this a lot simpler for you as you jump into your Star Wars journey. I really do want your journey to be as positive as it possibly can be, so feel free to pick and choose as I go through and really carve your own path. I am just here to guide you. I say 3 options because there are 2 that the fandom has decided are the most widely accepted for viewing Star Wars. There is release order, which has you starting from the first movie released in 1977 and just making your way down that list until you are at the newest release. But there's also chronological order, also known as timeline order, where you start at the very beginning of the current Star Wars timeline and work your way down that way. Now there are pros to each of these for sure, but there are also some things that I think aren't the most accessible depending on where you are in your Star Wars journey, and that's why I've come up with my super secret third option, but I'm getting ahead of myself, so more on that in a bit. As we begin our fantastical journey into a galaxy far, far away, I do want to provide you with just a teeny tiny bit of background so you really understand what we're getting into here. The first Star Wars movie, originally just called Star Wars, came out in 1977 and it was an instant success. It was later given its number and subtitle, making the full title Star Wars Episode 4: A New Hope. And that has been the naming convention ever since. Star Wars, episode number, subtitle. In the almost 50 years since this franchise has been out, there have been several dramatic shifts in production style, content, budget, and even production studios. Star Wars was originally in the hands of its creator George Lucas and his production company Lucasfilm, but after a sale in 2001, Lucasfilm is now a subsidiary of Disney and firmly under the Disney umbrella. Within Star Wars there are 12 movies, a trilogy of trilogies, 2 standalone films, and 1 animated film. There's also a handful of animated series, mostly from the late 2010s, and the most recent addition are the live action series exclusive to Disney Plus. As we go through, I'm going to give you spoiler-free summaries of all of the movies and series, and I'll tell you my personal favorites, but it is completely up to you to decide what you want to watch and what you want to skip. And one final caveat here before we get started. We're not going to be getting into the EU or the Lego universe or any of the books or the comics or any of the games, because honestly it just makes things way too complicated, and speaking directly to the friend who asked me to make this video, I don't think you're ready to hear about Sith Lord Lego Jar Jar Binks. I don't think any of us were, honestly. With all of that said, let's jump into it. Like I mentioned earlier, release order is exactly that. Watching the movies and shows in order as if you started in 1977. The strength of watching the franchise this way is that you're not going to miss any information because you are getting the information as it was released. I think this order is perfect for anyone who has 0 or very, very, very little knowledge about Star Wars. You'll get to meet the characters without the expectation that you would have seen them previously, and you'll get to watch in real time as the production budget and the technology got better and better and better through the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s up until now. The issue with this order is that it has you bouncing around the timeline a lot. Now I know that this isn't an issue for most people, but remember, the first movie came out in 1977, and they're supposed to take place almost 2 decades after the first movie of the prequels, which came out in 1999. There's obviously a huge jump in technology from those 2 years, which can be confusing for new viewers when you start watching the prequels and see these huge cities and flying cars and these really technologically impressive battle droids. But as far as jumping around the timeline goes, the first couple chunks won't be too bad. You'll watch the original 3 movies, starting with Episode 4, A New Hope from 1977, Episode 5, Empire Strikes Back from 1980, and then Episode 6, Return of the Jedi from 1983. These movies are highlighted by their lighthearted undertones and use of practical effects, and even if they're not the most visually impressive when you're comparing them to the stuff that we get today, I think that the beauty of these is that it was made almost entirely with practical effects, and I think that those effects have really added into this very classic, charming effect that these movies have when you watch them, and it has really helped them maintain their rewatchability even all of these years later. After watching the original trilogy, you'll move on to the 3 films from the early 2000s. These movies are referred to as the prequels because, of course, in universe they take place before the original 3 films. These are 1999's Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, which, in my opinion, is absolutely the best name, 2002's Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, and 2005's Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. In these movies, you're going to see a lot more of that now classic gummy animation style from the early 2000s, and a shift from practical effects to CGI. That shift makes the vibes of these movies so incredibly different than the vibes of the original trilogy. Not necessarily in a good or bad way, the vibes are just different. 6 movies in, you'll then head to the Clone Wars animated movie and TV show from 2008. Now, in universe, this series takes place between Episode 2 and Episode 3, with the last season bleeding into Episode 3. I'm going to give you a fair warning, this series is very long and is going to take up the majority of your time if you are trying to do a complete watch through. This is going to take a while. The first 5 seasons of this show originally aired on Cartoon Network between 2008 and 2013. Then it moved to Netflix for an abridged 6th season in 2014, before finally making it over to Disney Plus in 2020 for its 7th and final season. As you can probably imagine, there are quite a few episodes in this series. If you really want to blast through them, there are filler guides out there, but if this is your first time ever watching Star Wars or even ever watching this show, I suggest going through and just watching it as is, or at least going through and watching the first part of an episode and giving it a chance before skipping it and moving on. From there, you'll move on to Star Wars Rebels, a Disney XD show from 2014. Rebels is another animated series, and it takes place after the prequels but before the original trilogy. It has a very different animation style from the Clone Wars, but fun fact, that art style is heavily inspired by the concept art for the original trilogy. So after Rebels is where we really start jumping all over the place when watching in release order. From 2015's Episode 7, The Force Awakens, which is the first movie of the sequel trilogy that takes place decades after the original trilogy. Then Rogue One, A Star Wars Story from 2016, which is a standalone film that takes place directly before Episode 4, A New Hope. And if you don't have Whiplash yet, we're heading back to the OG trilogy times for Solo, A Star Wars Story, a movie that explains the backstory of Han Solo, which is one of the original trilogy trio. After Solo, you'll go back to the sequel era timeline and watch 2018's Star Wars Resistance, which is another animated TV show. And after all of that, we are finally at our first live action series, The Mandalorian. Now, if you want to watch in full release order, you'll be taking the next few series and splitting them up into seasons, but honestly, who has time for all of that? You, if you're watching in timeline order, but we'll get to that in a second. After The Mandalorian, you'll take a quick movie break to finish out the sequels with 2019's Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, and then strap in because we are about to do the Disney Plus exclusive gauntlet. The Book of Boba Fett and The Bad Batch both were released in 2021. Obi-Wan Kenobi, Andor, and Tales of the Jedi all released in 2022. Young Jedi Adventures and Ahsoka from 2023. And finally, Tales of the Empire, The Acolyte, and Skeleton Crew from 2024. Now we can get into a little bit more detail and talk about watching Star Wars in timeline order. The benefit of watching Star Wars this way is that you are watching everything unfold as if you were in the Star Wars universe experiencing history in real time. While I personally prefer this method, I think that it is much better suited to people who already have a background in Star Wars, or at least know a little bit about what's going on. For example, if you're the person who up until now has only seen the movies, watching in timeline order is absolutely perfect for you. In my opinion, watching it this way helps you get a better grasp of the lore and of course the timeline as a whole, and I think this one just leads to having a little bit of a deeper understanding. Even though you're getting the same content, watching it in this order, for me at least, really helps connect all of the dots and make it one flat line instead of more of like a bubble map, if that makes any sense. Now, I am so sorry, but I do feel obligated to say that technically, the first Star Wars things that we have in the timeline are the High Republic books and comics. These are absolutely phenomenal. And if you know that you like Star Wars, if you already have a background in it, if you've seen some of the movies or some of the series, and you just are looking for a deeper understanding of the lore and the universe, these bad boys right here are where you're going to get that information. The information and the characters that we're introduced to in the High Republic are so much different from anything that we get in the movies or the TV shows. So if you're looking for something completely different, if you're trying to like rekindle your connection with Star Wars and you haven't gotten into the High Republic, maybe give it a chance. Anyways, the first canon show that you're going to watch in timeline order is Young Jedi Adventures. Now, I can already hear the dark side of the fandom screaming as they type into the comment section right now. This show's for babies, it's trash, I can't believe you would even say that, I hate that show. And to them I say, have you watched this show? No? Okay, yes, this show is made for children. It is also charming and heartwarming and lighthearted and just fun. It has cameos from a couple of the characters from the High Republic books like Loden Greatstorm and Bel Zettifar and Yoda. Yes, Yoda is in the High Republic and he is also in Young Jedi Adventures. And he's in it like a lot. Actually. I could spend the rest of this video talking about how much I'm kind of obsessed with this series, but I'll just say, if you're not quite ready to dive into the books and you want to learn a little bit more about the High Republic, Young Jedi Adventures is where I would point you to. And I will also say that if you are doing a full canon timeline watch, Young Jedi Adventures is canon, so it should be a part of your timeline. And also, sorry, one more thing. Young Jedi Adventures introduces one of the most interesting characters we have gotten in Star Wars. There is a pirate named Tabor, and I am not kidding. His story is genuinely very interesting, and it makes me very upset that he's only in this series, so I can't talk about him because when I say the name Tabor, no one knows what I'm talking about. Anyways, if you're going to skip Young Jedi Adventures, or once you're done with it, you're going to head straight into The Acolyte, which is one of my top 3 favorite Star Wars series, and I know I'm going to get hate for that in the comments, but I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I'm not absolutely in love with it. The Acolyte is set towards the end of the High Republic era and follows a group of Jedi as they try to solve a series of murders. And I'm not going to say any more than that because I don't want to spoil anything. You're gonna hear me say this a lot in this part of the video, but this is another series that the dark side of the fandom will tell you isn't worth your time or isn't good. But I highly encourage you to 1, never listen to them, and 2, to form your own opinion about the show once you've seen it. The Acolyte is truly unlike anything else we have in Star Wars canon right now, so if this is your first time engaging with Star Wars, please don't expect everything to be like The Acolyte. Still, I'm here literally begging you, please give this show a chance. And like, if you end up liking it, I don't know, maybe go leave a review on IMDb or Rotten Tomatoes so that we can combat the review bomb that happened before the show was even released. After The Acolyte, we are going to make a big jump on the timeline and watch the first 2 prequel movies, but not the third. Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, follows Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn and his apprentice Obi-Wan Kenobi as they travel to the planet Naboo to settle a trade dispute that quickly gets out of hand. Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, follows Obi-Wan Kenobi and his new apprentice Anakin Skywalker as they navigate potential war between the Republic, the current governing body, and a group of separatists led by former Jedi Master turned bad but strictly for political reasons, Count Dooku. Side note, I'm just now realizing that it is extremely difficult for me to synopsize these, so I am sorry if I'm being very vague. I just don't want to drop any spoilers here. After Attack of the Clones, you'll watch the Clone Wars animated movie, which is basically just 2 TV episodes fused together, and then you'll watch the entire Clone Wars series. As the name suggests, the series follows Obi-Wan, Anakin, his new Padawan Ahsoka Tano, and a ton of other Jedi during the Clone Wars, which is a direct result of what happens at the end of Attack of the Clones. The official Star Wars website says that from here you should watch Tales of the Jedi, but I don't really agree with that. I would suggest watching Tales of the Jedi either before Attack of the Clones, after everything on this list, or to get the real timeline experience, break up the episodes into the Dooku episodes and the Ahsoka episodes. Watch all of the Dooku ones before Phantom Menace except for the last one, watch that after, and then watch all of the Ahsoka episodes after the Clone Wars series. You can break it down further than that, but for our purposes, that is plenty. But if you want to get really into the weeds about it, look up a watch guide. I'm sure there are tons out there. Now, the final few episodes of the Clone Wars TV show are going going to take place during and directly after the next movie in our timeline, which is episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. So if you want to break those up, again, I highly recommend looking up a watch guide. There are some of them that breaks it down by the minute so you can see everything that happens in canon timeline order. That is a very cool way to watch it. I do not think that it is necessary for your first viewing. It's just a little something extra if you have seen it multiple times. If you are watching for the first time and you are watching all of the Clone Wars and then Revenge of the Sith, be prepared to have Revenge of the Sith spoiled for you. If you want to avoid that, I recommend watching all of the Clone Wars except maybe the last 2 or 3 episodes, watching Revenge of the Sith, and then going back and watching those final episodes. After Revenge of the Sith, Star Wars Official recommends that you watch Tales of the Empire, but again, I don't think that this is a good place for that. Like Tales of the Jedi, Tales of the Empire bounces all over the timeline, so I personally think that it's better to watch the entire thing before Revenge of the Sith and after the Clone Wars TV show to avoid the majority of the spoilers that you're gonna get from the series, or again, watching it after everything on this list as kind of supplemental material. Luckily, those 2 series are the only 2 that we have that bounce around so drastically like that, so from here it's pretty smooth sailing. After Tales of the Empire or Revenge of the Sith, if you're saving toe, you'll move on to Star Wars The Bad Batch. We originally meet the main characters of The Bad Batch, a group of mutated and highly specialized clone troopers in an arc of the Clone Wars. The series expands on their story post Order 66, and no, I'm not going to explain what Order 66 is because it's a spoiler. If you know, you know, but if you don't, you'll find out in either the last few episodes of the Clone Wars or in Revenge of the Sith, whichever you watch first. Once you finish The Bad Batch, we're going to take a quick movie break to watch Solo: A Star Wars Story, which, as I mentioned earlier, explores the backstory of Han Solo, who is one of our original 3 protagonists. There is a large part of the fandom that despises this movie and refuses to acknowledge it, but if I'm being completely honest, I don't think it's as bad as they make it out to be. It's just one movie, so if you haven't seen it, or if this is your first time watching Star Wars, I would say just give it a shot. After Solo, you'll watch Obi-Wan Kenobi, which is our second live-action series in the timeline order. This series follows Obi-Wan Kenobi, former Padawan of Qui-Gon Jinn and former master of Anakin Skywalker, many years after Revenge of the Sith. This show also introduces one of the main characters of the original trilogy, Princess Leia Organa of Alderaan, who we will be seeing a lot more of very shortly. After Obi-Wan, you get to watch my favorite trio of things in Star Wars, which is Andor, Star Wars Rebels, and Rogue One. Andor follows several different characters, including Cassian Andor and Mon Mothma, who you would have already met in Rogue One or the original trilogy if we were watching in release order, and follows the start of the rebellion against the Empire. Star Wars Rebels expands on that rebellion with a completely new cast of characters, including fan favorites like Harrison Dula, Kanan Jarrus, Ezra Bridger, Chopper. Rogue One, my absolute favorite Star Wars movie, follows Cassian Andor and a new character, Jyn Erso, on a very dangerous mission that is critical to the success and the survival of the rebellion. After Rogue One, you get to enjoy the original trilogy, and again in order, those are Episode 4, A New Hope, Episode 5, Empire Strikes Back, and Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. All 3 of those movies follow Luke Skywalker, Leia Organa, and Han Solo as they fight against the Empire. Similar to watching in release order, timeline order is also back heavy with a lot of Disney Plus exclusive shows, which we are getting into right now. First is The Mandalorian, which takes place years after Return of the Jedi. It is a completely new era in the galaxy, highlighted by political disarray and a bunch of different factions fighting for power. The Mandalorian follows a new character, Pedro Pascal, also known as Din Djarin, who is a bounty hunter and introduces the Mandalorians, who you previously met in Star Wars: The Clone Wars. In timeline order, you're going to watch Mando Season 1 and 2, and then you're going to go over to Book of Boba Fett, which follows Boba Fett, a character from the original trilogy, who is also a bounty hunter. And then you're going to go back to Season 3 of The Mandalorian before watching Seasons 1 and 2 when it comes out of Ahsoka. I highly recommend splitting it up like this because these characters are going to pop up in each other's stories. So to get a full understanding of the timeline and where these characters are at what time, you're going to have to split it up like that, which again is Mando 1, Mando 2, Book of Boba Fett, Mando 3, Ahsoka 1, Ahsoka 2 when it comes out in 2025. 5/2026. After all of that is done, you are then going to watch the most recent Star Wars release as of filming, which is Skeleton Crew. Again, one of my personal favorites. I'm going to warn you now that, like The Acolyte, Skeleton Crew is unlike anything we have or probably will ever see from Star Wars, and the dark side of the fandom will tell you that this is another one that is not worth your time. And I will counter that on this one specifically, saying that they are absolutely wrong and you should watch this show. After Skeleton Crew, you'll move on to the last animated series in this order, which is Star Wars Resistance. Resistance follows a completely new group of characters as they build up a resistance to yet another evil faction who has emerged to try to control the galaxy, which is infamously led by Kylo Ren. Now, Resistance starts before the sequel movies, which is why I have it here. Within its seasons, it stretches past the sequel movies, so if you want to split it up, by all means go ahead. If you're not splitting it up, after Resistance you're going to watch the sequel trilogy, which again is Episode 7, The Force Awakens, followed by Episode 8, The Last Jedi, and finally Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. These movies follow yet another trio of characters, some of which you will meet in Resistance, with Rey, Finn, and Poe Dameron. Now, these movies expand on the Resistance Against the First Order plotline, but really do up the stakes from Star Wars Resistance, mostly because Resistance is aimed at a younger audience and these movies were not. The sequel movies also include all of the original characters, so Luke, Leia, and Han all return for these movies. I know I said I wasn't going to get into the books or the comics, but if I can tempt you just a little bit, just like a little bit as a treat, I cannot recommend highly enough the novel Canto Bight. This book is a group of 4 short stories all based on the planet Cantonica, which is where Canto Bight is located. It is also where 2 of the main characters of The Last Jedi end up going for a majority of the film. It is 1, a really fun read, and 2, it'll give you a little bit of background and let you appreciate a little bit more of what's going on during those scenes of the movie. Movie aside, I just cannot recommend this book enough. It was my first 5-star read of 2025, and if you follow my reading journey at all, you know that I am not the type of person who gives out 5-star ratings a lot. So when I say that this is a 5-star for me and that it is good, you can trust that it is an actually good read. I personally listened to the audiobook while I was reading along and it made the experience so much better. So listen to the audiobook before you go watch The Last Jedi if you want to get into the lore a little bit more. Back to the movies though. I understand that a lot of Star Wars fans were unhappy with the sequel movies, but there's an equal if not larger force that do enjoy them. I will be the first person to admit that there is a lot of stuff in these movies that I wish that they could change. Most of all being how they handled Finn's character and basically completely pushed him off to the side, and how awfully they handled Poe's backstory even after promising Oscar Isaac that they wouldn't do exactly what they ended up doing. To take a look behind the scenes of these movies a little bit. The sequel movies went through several directional changes in the process of being made that really did not set them up to succeed. But whether people like them or not, the sequel movies are part of the current Star Wars canon, and they're something that Disney can and will eventually expand on. Rey and her story made Disney a boatload of money. And regardless of what the so-called true Star Wars fans will tell you, Rey did not and will not ruin this franchise. Like I keep saying, give these characters and these films a chance, form your own opinion, and don't listen to the people out there who are just spewing nonsense and negative opinions for views. And that, dear friends, is how to watch all of Star Wars in both release and timeline order. But what about the third option? What? You said, and I quote, "This is why I have a super secret third option, but I'm getting ahead of myself. More on that later." Oh yeah, the super secret third option. My ultimate Star Wars hack. My super secret, probably going to get me yelled at in the comments, third option for watching Star Wars is watch whatever you're interested in first and go from there. If you are watching Star Wars, I want you to enjoy it, especially if this is your first time watching anything in the franchise ever, I want you to set yourself up for success, to get a win under your belt, so to speak. So instead of forcing you to watch something that's either going to be one, overly complicated and full of lore that you might not understand, or two, potentially confusing and underwhelming, I want you to start with the thing that grabbed your attention, the thing that made you want to start on your Star Wars journey. Whatever made you interested enough to look up and click on this video, and then watch it all the way through. If you saw something in the High Republic that piqued your interest, by all means start with the books and the comics. If you randomly saw an episode of Rebels that you really liked, start there. If you're only watching to get more time with our precious baby Yoda, yes, I do know his name, and no, I'm not gonna say it because it is technically a spoiler. Start with The Mandalorian. If the reason that you're here and you want to start this journey is because you keep hearing about Star Wars and you want to know what all the hype is about, I would suggest watching all of the movies first, and then if you're interested enough to keep going, start from the top with timeline order and go all the way through. That's how I experienced it for the first time, and I think that it gave me a really good understanding of what Star Wars is, and has only grown my love for the series as I continue to watch timeline order over and over and over again. So if release order seems boring and timeline order seems daunting, pick something that you're interested in and go from there. Start wherever you think you're going to find the most enjoyment. And that is it. Let me know in the comments what your preferred viewing method is and if you think that I missed anything. Also, I know I mentioned a couple of my favorite things in this video, so if you would be interested in seeing a full tier list of my favorite to least favorite Star Wars things, let me know. I think that might be fun. I have a ton of ideas for this year and I am so excited to start making these long form videos again. If you found this video at all entertaining or helpful and you feel like sticking around, please consider liking and subscribing. It really does mean the world to me. Thank you so much for watching. May the Force be with you, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. It's like a really chill, relaxed 320 hours worth of content. Nothing too much. It's nothing you can't sit down and do in one full sitting on a weekend.